Hey, what's up everyone? Today we have a very special video today and a very special guest. We have Josh Needham. He is a rep with Sony and he's actually Precision Cameras rep. So whenever I have questions, which I always have a ton of them, Josh is my go-to. This guy is well, for lack of a better word, a genius. So today we're going to be going over the Sony Alpha 1. We're going to talk about briefly the specs, but we're going to do a lot of shooting and this thing has a ton of features. And so Josh, can you tell me some of the new features that this Alpha 1 has?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, where do I begin? Let's start with high resolution, right? 50 megapixel sensor. It's a brand new sensor from us. Boasting that same technology from the Alpha 9. So very different from all of our sensors. Alpha 9 is ridiculously fast. It scans ridiculously fast. So here we have basically the ability to shoot at 30 frames per second with that 50 megapixel resolution.
Okay, so 30 frames per second. I got to test this earlier. If you haven't heard it, the shutter sound is all electronic and it's extremely fast. But other than that, are there any caveats to when you are shooting at 30 frames per second? Can I shoot raw photos uncompressed, or is there any setbacks to that?
So we introduced actually a different level of compression, lossless compression. So yes, we have uncompressed, lossless compression, and then compressed. With 30 frames per second, you would need to be using compressed. Whereas if you still get the option to shoot lossless and uncompressed. It will drop it down to about 20 frames per second.
Okay, that's good to know. So it's not gonna gray it out in the menus, it's just gonna automatically say it can't handle that?
Correct.
Okay, another great feature on this camera is that I read on there that you can use V60 cards for probably like 80% of the shooting modes on this camera, which is something nice to have because majority of people already own V60s.
Sure.
So really impressed with that. You do also have the dual slots that accept the CF Express Type A. When would I benefit in using a CF Express Type A versus an SD card in this camera?
Yeah, I mean, we saw the CF Express Type A unveil with Alpha 7S III, and really that was primarily, it's a video-oriented camera. When you are maximizing that video quality, slow motion, especially high frames per second, 120, 240 frames per second, that's when I really think it's necessary to be using that CF Express Type A card. This camera has that ability, 5 times or 10 times slow motion, just like the Alpha 7S III.
We have a dial on the top that's very similar to our Alpha 9 cameras, but one thing from shooting with Sony that I love is all of these buttons seem to be customizable. So if I want to actually get into something, if let's say I want to set custom 1 to bird autofocus, that's something that I can map out on the camera. And that actually segues into our next thing, the autofocusing system. Exactly how many autofocus points do we have on this and what types of autofocusing do we get in this camera?
Yeah, I mean, the autofocus has vastly improved in the idea that we have bird eye autofocus detection now outside of human and animal, which we had in previous generation cameras. 759 autofocusing points. And that same amount of autofocusing points is available when you're shooting in crop mode. We have such high resolution on this sensor that we're shooting in crop mode, we can achieve 50% more focal length and still retain 21 megapixels.
Oh, so when you're in Super 35, you're getting 21 megapixels.
Right.
That's pretty good. So the viewfinder I hear has also been updated in this camera.
Yeah, so we saw every viewfinder I say is improved every model up, right? I mean, we said 5 million dots in that Alpha 7R4. Alpha 7S III then got 9 million dots. Same here, same resolution there, except 240 frames per second on that refresh, on that OLED refresh speed.
So another feature that when I took this home last night and I was messing around with, I love this feature, the
Best thing ever.
The closed shutter.
Camera needs to know that.
So the Alpha 9, when you shut the camera off, the shutter will actually cover the sensor. Now, that's something, is this the first one that Sony did on this model?
So it actually came as a firmware update with Alpha 9 too.
Okay.
Right. And so by default, that setting is not on, but we can go into the menu and turn that on. And which, by the way, this camera has the brand new menu system like we see in the Alpha 7S III.
Yeah, so I was actually going through that menu and I have a lot of people that complain of the first Sony menus, but personally, I never thought they were terrible.
Sure.
I mean, I grew up with them, so they were just, second nature. But this menu is very, very accessible. And if you're getting this camera for the first time, those new menus do make a difference. But I also love that it's touchscreen, and it's very responsive. So if I flip up, it's gonna flip up and scroll through and stop eventually.
Yeah, pinch to zoom with playback. You know, features outside of just on the touch screen. We are so acclimated with our cell phones nowadays, or smartphones. It's all touch, and so we can basically access all the menu with touch. The function menu, some of the controls you can actually change while you're recording to actually change that transition speed of the of video and whatnot while you're recording.
I saw that transition speed, I believe, for the first time on the ZV-1 review that I did. Correct me if I'm wrong. It was on other cameras previously, or was
I think that was the first camera to introduce it. Yes, ZV-1 started that, and then we saw it in Alpha 7C, Alpha 7S3, Alpha 1.
What is this sensor on the front that I'm seeing?
Oh, that's the visible IR sensor. So basically it's a visible light sensor. So what happens here is it's very much for white balance control, that white balance priority. So the sensor is doing a lot of its job on the exposure front, you know, maintaining that. But in certain conditions, actually having that sensor out in front helps a lot with, think about it like a light meter, incident light metering, that white little dome in the front, same idea.
Okay, and the white balance on here, I've tested it, it's phenomenal. I mean, you can select a little dot and put it on like a gray card and set it that way. I know that's on other cameras, but that's just something I always like to talk about.
Right.
And the next point I want to touch on is the ergonomics. So the overall feel of this, it's got a really nice deep grip on it. It feels very similar to the A7S3. Do you know if this is the same chassis that they're using on it?
Yeah, virtually the same. I mean, outside of the obvious fully articulated screen is not there. It's the pull-out waist level. But we get that same, you know, touchscreen control just like that fully articulated had. It doesn't have the top record button like the Alpha 7S3 also gets, but for interfaces, I mean, when we open up all those ports there on the side, we're getting virtually everything that A9 II, Alpha 7R4, and the S3 offered, which is full-size HDMI, USB-C with power delivery. This camera could be charging. You'd be using it faster than you're actually depleting the battery. Full-size HDMI, we have an Ethernet port, so that'll support 1000 base T, basically ridiculously fast transfer rates, because we can have, you know, background FTP transfer at the same time with this camera. It's fully loaded. I mean, even a PC sync for a manual flash.
So who would be using that Ethernet? I usually plug that up into my computer at home. So I'm not too sure.
Same idea, right? You're sending data through that Ethernet. So someone's hardlined in and they would be taking their photos or taking the photos, and in the background, it is actually simultaneously dumping all that to like a server, and then someone else on the other end, the receiving end, is actually getting ready and calling them and sending them out for post.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So really, really fast process there. I hate that there's no articulating screen.
Yeah, you and everybody else, I hear.
And so this is for my viewers as well. I know some of you in the comments are, when there is an articulating screen, you're like, oh, real photographers don't use that. Guys, it's 2021. Everyone, I mean, whether you want to vlog or not, it doesn't hurt to have it there. So why not have it? That's my one thing. I'm done ranting.
Can I answer why not?
Yes, why not?
Yeah, I mean, Alpha 1 comes out, and then here we also have Xperia Pro also coming out on the same side. And Xperia Pro is a monitor. It's a cell phone, but it's also a monitor for Alpha in general. So we can actually hardline in with the HDMI and use that as our monitor. Right.
There it is.
Touch tracking is supported. Color control is supported on that monitor, you know, so we can actually see vividly that color as we're recording.
And I also want to say, when Josh brought it yesterday into the store, I was actually at work. I wanted to test the vlogging capability on it. And so basically I was walking around the store with a 24mm and just testing the autofocus that way. And I couldn't see myself, but I will give it to you. I never went out of focus. I mean, this thing snapped onto whatever I was trying to. So even if you don't have that Xperia Pro phone with you, you can still you can rely on this camera that it's going to hit almost everything.
As I said, it doesn't even have to be an Xperia phone, right? It could be your own cell phone. I don't care which one you use, because we have the 5 gigahertz Wi-Fi here. So even wirelessly, you can just have a little smartphone bracket right on the hot shoe and still use your own phone for that same premise.
And before we finish up with the photo aspects, there's something that I do want to cover is the flash on this camera. Well, there's not an internal flash, but the flash capabilities of this camera. So I believe you're able to shoot with a electronic shutter as well with using a flash.
Right, yeah, electronic or mechanical. You know, this camera does have a mechanical shutter, 10 frames per second shooting. When you are using the mechanical shutter, we actually have the ability, natively, it'll be 1/200th of a second flash sync. There's a menu item in there that extends that range 1 stop up to 1/400th of a second. And if you're in crop mode, that's 1/500th. So again, you're shooting with a mechanical shutter and you get a 1/400th of a second flash sync. So now you have the ability to use your pocket flash at full power at higher shutter speeds with continuous bursts. Now, will you get all the frames with the flash? That's dependent on the flash, right? Recycle speed and things like that. But we have that ability out, and also electronic shutter can now support shooting with a flash.
And from my understanding, I don't believe any other manufacturers do the electronic shutter. So if I'm, let's say a wedding photographer, I could basically live on the electronic shutter on this all day now, is what I'm hearing.
Sure, you could be completely silent. Obviously the flash is gonna call your bluff and show that you took a photo right then and there. But when you even shoot with a mechanical shutter, I mean, it's quiet. It is so quiet, and that's it's been redesigned. It has dampeners around to really keep that very silent. So to each their own. We do really, with this camera, I love to say it's no compromises. You know, we talked a bunch about the photos, and there's still a whole nother realm that we need to kind of explore with this camera.
Yeah, and so that other realm is actually going to be the video side of this camera. I saw in all the headlines, and everyone saw it, or saw it when it came out, 8K video. Can you talk about the 8K video? I know some other cameras are doing 8K RAW. This one, I believe, doesn't do it internal 8K RAW. But can we just speak a little bit more on what the Alpha 1 has?
Yeah, so here's the first time we're seeing with a full frame sensor from Sony giving you support for 8K 30 or 24. It will be compressed with our higher efficiency H.265 compression. So that's the one caveat there. And I mean, H.265 is just a newer, updated to your workflow. But that also means you can shoot 8K with an SD card. We are not limited to using that higher CF Express Type A card, although, I will say there's a benefit to using the CF Express Type A card in general. But we can do that here, outside of also shooting 4K, 4K 120, and all the other frame rates below, 1080 120. With slow motion recording, we actually get 10 times slow motion because we're shooting 240 frames per second with HD. And
for the 240 frames per second, do you need the CF Express Type A card?
Yes, because you will be in S&Q mode on that camera. Yep.
All right.
So FYI, if you're in S&Q mode, use the CF Express Type A card.
Okay, perfect. So also, since we do have 8K sensor, all that, I believe the colors also redesigned differently from some of the cameras. I do know that we are getting the S-Cinetone in this camera. And if you're not aware of S-Cinetone, I believe Sony created it for like their Venice camera, I believe was the first one to have that. And then the FX9 also had S-Cinetone. And from my understanding is the S-Cinetone just gives you a beautiful skin tone look for people, and that out of camera, you get a usable file.
For sure. It's natural, it's vibrant. Again, you're spending a lot less time in post. That's what we're trying to do. We're trying to make it easier for you. So yes, you're gonna be shooting, you can shoot in that color space, you can shoot in log. Here we have, if we wanna have an idea of maybe there's a lot of Alpha 9 in here, Alpha 9 did not have the ability to shoot in log. So here we can do that with such a high speed shooting camera. It really just combines the elements of the R, the S, and the 9 all into one. And that very literal, that one is there for a reason.
Fresh out of the box, the S-Cinetone, I believe, is Picture Profile 11. That was the new one that y'all added into this camera. Do you think that we might see an update to a different camera in the Sony line to also include S-Cinetone?
I think I know what you're talking about, and obviously, I can't say anything.
Yeah, so me and a lot of other people out there are hoping that the S-Cinetone does come to the Alpha 7S3.
He said it.
And I said it, no, not confirmed. I mean, it might not happen, but overall, very, very happy with it. I shoot with S-Cinetone a lot of times when using my FX9. gorgeous straight out of there. I know a lot of people would be like, oh, Sony, the color's not great. You can't say that anymore, guys. I mean, this encompasses everything great about cameras that are out right now, packs it all into one, and I think this camera is going to be the most talked about camera of 2021, but also the one that people are looking forward to the most.
Yeah.
And that's coming from a Sony fanboy. I say it all the time, I do these reviews, but I really true that this is something exciting that is coming out soon. Is there anything else you think that we missed or we should go over in the meantime on this? Anything?
I mean, okay, so we have such high resolution, and going right back to the video, all of Alpha 7S III video goes into this camera, right? Mm-hmm. The low light is not the same.
Okay.
Right, because the Alpha 7S III is such small megapixels because it's honestly maximizing that pixel size to have that low light capability. Here we're topping out about 102,000 ISO, whereas your A7S III is going to be upwards of 409,000 ISO, right? Mm-hmm. But even so, physics come into play, bigger pixel size. But what I would say is you can shoot in Super 35 mode and still have 4K quality. That's the big difference. The S3 does not handle crop mode plus 4K.
Okay.
Right? Or crop mode with 4K. It's not enough resolution.
Yeah, you'd be way below
right?
the...
So here we have a camera that we can actually, use Super 35 mode, have oversampling, nearly 6K oversampling to 4K, and still use features like clear image zoom at the same time.
And still get a 4K capable image.
Exactly.
So I mean, you can turn your prime lenses into a little bit of a zoom with that clear image
24
zoom.
becomes a 36, and then with clear image zoom becomes even 2 times that.
Okay, yeah. Right. So that is, wow, that's great.
Yep.
So if you stuck around long enough to listen to that whole convo, which, thank you, Josh, that was a lot of good info. Let's get into the shooting, guys. So we're here actually at downtown Austin, but we're at the University of Texas today. This is my first time out here.
Go Longhorns.
Yeah, go Longhorns. It's a Super Bowl weekend.
Yeehaw.
Well, no, I'm an Aggie. I can't do that. All right, so yeah, we're gonna get right into it. We're gonna shoot some flash, we're gonna shoot some video, and we're gonna get you all the footage that you might need. Let's jump right into it. All right, so we just got finished shooting with the Alpha 1. So of course, now it's time for some final thoughts. What did we overall think of the camera? Well, I mean, the simple thing, or I guess to keep it short, is I was in love with this camera. Now, I like how Josh mentioned earlier that it was fully loaded, and that's definitely true. I probably dove into about 20% of these items, and there's so much more that would definitely assist you as a photographer that I didn't need, at least shooting out here. The colors were amazing, stabilization was amazing, the resolution, shooting in 8K. I mean, just having something this size, shooting in 8K, that you don't have to worry about overheating. And even if you do hit that overheating threshold, the cool down times from what I'm seeing online are just phenomenal. All that packed into this small design body, there's nothing you can complain about other than, I guess, the flip out screen. But even then, after shooting with it, it's not like I need that flip out screen because of how reliable that autofocus system is. I do want to talk about the new designed shutter. At first, when I first took a few shots with it, I was like, oh, I don't like that. But after shooting with it, you definitely get used to it. So it's just something to get used to. And it's not the typical like feeling. It's just, it just goes once and like hits, it's dampened, Josh was saying. So that's just one thing that I did notice. Other than that, I love the features, especially in video, where you can emphasize your video on the back LCD screen. It'll highlight the edges in red. Cropping it into Super 35 mode was also great. And then being able to have that mechanical shutter sync speed up to 400, shooting at 30 frames per second with the flash, as long as your flash handled that, that was just a feature that was phenomenal. Having the model being able to walk around, do all these movements, and I was just able to spray the photos down. And we mentioned earlier with Josh and Todd as well, that you can kind of, to some extent, buy your way into being a better photographer. And I never think that I'm the best at this, but I mean, the capability that this camera gave to me was just outstanding and something I do want to touch on. The last thing I also want to touch on is going to be the price point of the camera. So it is going to retail for $6,500 US at the time of this video. Now, for most people, that is a very steep price. This is the first time we've seen a price in an Alpha Series camera. When I was talking with Josh earlier, he did mention though that there is potentially 3 cameras fit into one. So you do get all the capabilities of an A9, you do get the resolution of an A7R4, and then you do get the video capabilities of an S3. Now, if you're needing the low light performance, of course, you can differentiate. The S3 is completely different. It's gonna handle that way different. But 3 camera bodies fit into one, $6,500, I feel like is a more than fair enough price to pay. All right, so this is gonna bring us to an end on the Alpha 1 video. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments, the features you're excited, if you're gonna pick one up, if there's some features you would have loved to see added into this, maybe with some possible firmware updates. Let us know down in the comment section down below. Also, make sure you're subscribing if you haven't already. It's free, just go ahead, press that button, and it helps us out a bunch. Remember, like, share, and I already said subscribe, so we'll see you on our next video.